This is the baggage carousel. Later in life, it came back to him at odd moments. As a rule, he avoided talking about it, but then it arrived in the foreground of his thoughts, unannounced, and he had to stare at it, the memory. Girlfriends were curious, of course. This was due in part to his curiosity about how it happened for them. With whom? If they wanted to. If they liked it. When they asked him the same question, he would roll out the story grandly, getting up on an elbow in the dark, the sheets all curled around them. It was a moment of solidarity and confession. But he came to realize he'd never made it to the end of the story, in part because whomever was listening seemed so amused. Then at a friend's wedding, he found himself telling the story to a group of people, all of them giddy as he unfurled the narrative. He did the whole thing, the bathroom, everything, omitting only the end. The crowd of people, which included several good friends, but also this couple from Philadelphia who he hardly knew, laughed and slapped their thighs and said, "Really? You're kidding. Really?" The flight was from Washington, D.C. to Houston. Sam was going to spend a weekend with his cousin Jason, who was 10 years older and known in the family as a bit of a degenerate. His mother had wrung her hands when Sam first announced that Jason had invited him and that he would like to go, venting out loud about the pros and cons. The main pro was that it might be good for Sam to spend some time in the company of an older man. The main con was that Jason was a musician and someone who gave every impression of having bad habits of the sort that are highly transferable to an impressionable 14-year-old. Sam kept his mouth shut about it and let his mom work out the issues with her sister, Jason's mom. Sam had never told his mother that over the years Jason had taken every opportunity to extol the virtues of sex, group sex when possible, drugs, alcohol, the Allman Brothers, and various jazz fusion artists. Jason had once advised Sam to spit as often as possible when walking with a girl because although they would complain and find it gross, girls ultimately were more likely to have sex with you if at some strategic moment you grossed them out. In the end, his mother let him go. The ticket was bought, and for a brief moment it seemed like his mother would want him to wear one of those plastic pouches around his neck containing his identification, like he was a pet or a minor, which, she pointed out, he still was, technically. After the plane had been aloft for 20 minutes, the refreshments cart rattled down the aisle, and the chirpy sing-song voice of the stewardess drifted over the ambient hum. The phrase, "Juice or coffee?" was intercut with the sound of ice being poured into plastic cups. Sam deferred to the woman sitting next to him when the cart arrived at their row. Mid-20s, a lot of tousled brown hair, wedding ring. Sam was a precocious noticer of wedding rings, having observed at an early age that his mother did not wear one. When he asked her why, she said, "Because, sweetie, I'm not married." "Bloody Mary, please," said the woman sitting next to him. The stewardess was pulling together the Bloody Mary. He glanced sideways at the woman who had ordered it. She was attractive, but kind of overweight. The sort of girl, he thought, that you look at and think, God, it would be fun to pork her, but it would suck if anyone saw me with her. Then with a shudder, Sam thought, please tell me that sentiment is universal and I'm not going to hell. He did not believe in heaven, hell, or God, but every now and then he felt something or someone looking over his shoulder, wanting to give advice. He'd once shared this thought with his shrink, and in the silence that followed added, "Do you think it's my father?" But the shrink hadn't answered. The stewardess was doing a semi-limbo, shoulders back, bending at the knees, rummaging through the shelf of cans. She could have bent forward, but instead she did this awkward limbo-like gesture, and Sam wondered if maybe it was because if she bent forward, it meant her ass would stick out, and she didn't want her ass sticking out into someone's face. "No Bloody Mary mix. Would tomato juice be okay?" she said, "or I could check in the back when I finish." Tomato juice was fine for the woman sitting beside him. Sam took the can, the cup of ice, and finally the little vodka bottle and handed them across to his neighbor. "Thank you," she said. She was wearing jeans and a heavy knit sweater within which lurked an intriguing fullness and heaviness whose contours he couldn't quite make out. As he handed her each item, he noticed her hands. The nails were manicured in a deep red. The hands themselves were a bit strangled looking and tired. "And you, sir?" said the stewardess. "Same for me." "I'm going to need to see some ID," said the stewardess. "I don't have it on me, ma'am," he said. "Then I'm afraid I can't serve you, sir," she said, totally perky. "Is there anything else I can get you?" "I can't believe I'm being carted on an airplane," he said. "We have laws up here, same as on the ground," she said. "Actually, a lot more of them. I just don't think it's reasonable. It's not like a captain is going to come out of..." He's dropped off into the silence of defeat. Then he said, "You're a stewardess, not a bartender." He was just lashing out. He knew. He felt bad about it. "Actually, we like to be called flight attendants. Can I offer you soda or juice?" He recovered his composure and said, "I'll have a tomato juice, ma'am, and a lemon." "Sure thing. And I'll have a second bottle of vodka," said the woman sitting next to him. "Okie doke, that'll be $4 for the second bottle," said the flight attendant, her smile tight. She handed the beverage to him and then the bottle of vodka and stood there to make sure he passed it over. He held on to it. He held on to it while the woman beside him attacked the interior of her purse. At last she produced a twisted, strangled-looking clump of bills, which he passed along. The flight attendant in her cart moved on to the next aisle. "Juice or coffee?" chirped out again, and Sam sat there contemplating the red, viscous liquid in the cup on his tray. The woman mixed her drink. The second bottle sat there, unopened. The initial thrill of her request, which Sam was sure meant that she would give it to him, was starting to turn into a kind of mortification. Would she make him ask for it? He peered at her hand. The diamond ring pivoted like a top as she stirred in circles, round and round. When his mother made her remark about not being married, there was a brief short circuit in his mind. The synapses fired one after the other, like the blue lights lighting up one after another to illuminate a runway that led to his dead father, lying beneath a collapsed roof. In this picture, his father's hands and feet were sticking out of the rubble, like in a cartoon. There was no actual photograph of this image. It was a figment of his imagination, but it was real too, since this is apparently what had happened to his father when Sam was 2 years old. The image was a sad photographic heirloom, which he kept buried in the backyard of his mind. But his mother's remark led his gaze to this buried treasure and exhumed it. Confronted with the image of his father under the rubble, his circuit shorted, sparks flew, and then all vanished, except for an awareness hovering like smoke that lingers after a bullet is gone, of her absent wedding ring, and of all wedding rings. When the woman next to him finally said, in a small, conspiring voice, "Would you like this?" there was so much tension between them, it was as though a whole conversation had transpired already. He poured the vodka, and they toasted. "Cheers," she said, smiling, her eyes squinting in a way that struck him as familiar. She asked him questions about himself. "What grade are you in?" she said. "Who do you hang out with?" "I bet you have a lot of girlfriends." He went back and forth between answering her honestly and trying to calibrate what would give him the biggest advantage. He wasn't sure to what end he wanted an advantage. She was an adult, and he reflexively spoke to adults with an eye towards some hidden agenda. That was the game, except she was an unusual kind of adult. She conspired with him on another bottle of vodka. He felt pleasantly light. She was animated. She seemed to want something from him, some acceptance into a club, his club. He couldn't imagine what his club had to offer other than that he was in it. Perhaps it offered her a chance to be a teenager. She acted like nothing would make her happy than to be able to be in the lunchroom when he walked in so they could sit together.